Traveling south from Las Vegas, we pass through the towns of Henderson and Boulder City, and finally arrive at the world-famous Hoover Dam, which causes Lake Mead, one of the fine recreation areas that's gradually developing out here in the West.
A lot of people take vacations up there, don't they, Manus?
Oh, yes. Wonderful fishing, wonderful boating, skin diving, all types of water sports. It's becoming more and more popular each year. From Boulder City and from Hoover Dam, we pass south into the state of Arizona. You go for 15 miles on the road that parallels the Colorado River, finally arriving at a dirt road which takes you down to the Colorado River and to Willow Beach, the site from which we will begin our search for Queho's cave. Now here at Willow Beach, you'll find complete facilities for the boatsman or the treasure hunter, including launching ramps, boat rentals, outboards and boats, and very nominal fees for storage.
Well, isn't it possible to reach the cave location or the area that Queho operated by anything but boat, Miles?
Well, the area has no roads into it, and you can get in by horseback, but of course this entails a lot more work, and it's a very rugged trip. The best way to go into the area is by boat.
Hadn't conditions changed a good deal over the many years that had passed since Art Schroeder had found Queho in 1940?
Well, they very definitely had. This was one thing we were worried about as we prepared to leave that day. Since Art Schroeder had been to the area, Davis Dam had been constructed farther down the river, and the area that you see us in now is called Lake Mojave and is formed by the Davis Dam, which backs the water up to the base of Hoover Dam. Now, a lot of the landmarks which Art Schroeder drew on his map obviously had been covered by the river, but there was one prominent one which we intended to look for, and that was a sheer outcropping of rock rising several hundred feet into the air from the water's edge. According to Art Schroeder's map, we were to follow the course of the Colorado River downstream for approximately 3.5 miles. As I said before, we were looking for an outcropping of rock rising up from the water's edge. Beyond that outcropping, we would see a dry wash, a large dry wash coming down from the cliffs up above the river right down to the water's edge. It would be this wash that we'd have to follow in order to reach the area of Queho's cave, the logical place to start our treasure search.
Well, of course, a lot of people talk about gold, but was there any substantiation of the fact that gold had been found in these mountains?
Very definitely. In the late 1800s, this area was a rip-roaring mining area. The towns of Nelson and Searchlight were turning out immense amounts of gold. And of course, they were typical mining camps, just like the ones depicted in the Western movies. After we had gone the distance that we thought was approximately 3.5 miles, we started checking the map. And Buddy was soon to discover, on our right, a sheer outcropping of rock rising right up from the water's edge, just as Art Schroeder had told us the night before.
I bet you're getting kind of excited at this moment.
We're getting very excited, and we're heading in towards shore at the present time. And there's one thing we might caution boatsmen about, or people that might come to search for this treasure. The Colorado River is noted for its treachery. You'll find sandbars, sunken logs, dead trees and branches that are below the water. And you must be very careful. We're at this location heading in towards the shoreline to make sure that your shearing pin isn't knocked off or something worse will happen to your boat. Up ahead, the dry wash that Art Schroeder had told us about.
Right about now, I'll bet you and the whole party began to think of all those tales about 23 people that Queho had killed, and you can almost visualize him standing down looking upon you.
Very definitely, Bill, especially when we cut the outboard motor. It's strange, the ominous silence that you find in this area, where there is no form of life except a few branches, and the only sound you hear is the wind whistling through the scrub bushes that you find in the area. There's a few points we might caution treasure hunters about in this area. Number one is that you should never enter this country in the summertime. The temperatures here soar to 120 to 130 degrees because of the volcanic formation and the fact that the canyon forms more or less a pocket, and it becomes like an oven here. When you leave the water's edge, you should also take an adequate supply of water. We took 2 canteens with us, which we found were hardly enough to sustain 3 people in the climb to Queho's cave. Another point, as Buddy illustrates here, is look before you put your hands. The area in the springtime and the fall is infested with rattlesnakes, and one must be very careful where he walks and where he places his hands. Also, wear a good pair of shoes, because the area is very rocky, and it's very hard on the feet.
I imagine that tremendous temperature must have been what mummified Queho when he died, either by a rattlesnake bite or whatever it was.
Yes, it was probably the heat, and also the fact the area is very dry. After you follow the wash for approximately a mile, there's another wash to the right, which parallels the base of a cliff. And here you'll start finding all types of caves, and we weren't sure just exactly which one was Queho's cave until we discovered one that looked slightly different from others. The fact that it looked different prompted us to investigate it, and we found a stone wall constructed in front of the cave entrance with holes in it which resembled portholes in which someone might point a gun down to the river below. So entering the cave very cautiously, remembering the bandage we had found on Queho's leg, we weren't in any mood to be bitten by a rattlesnake ourselves.
Miles, at this point, I imagine you were pretty excited, but you had to prove that this was Queho's cave, and how did you go about that?
Well, this is the way that we conduct our particular searches. First of all, after arriving in the area and making sure, or reasonably sure, that we are in the right area, we check our equipment out. Now, these are metal detecting pieces of equipment which are used by treasure hunters. The next phase is to mark the area off. In this particular instance, we marked off the cave floor plus the entrance in front of the cave, because Indians around their ruins have a very unsanitary habit of throwing all of the refuse and things that they think are of little value over the side of the cliff. So we marked the whole area off and went over it first with a metal detector, checking out each square, looking for metallic objects that may be of value or at least of historical interest. Then, after that is done, we go over the same area once again with pick and shovel and whisk broom, looking for non-metallic objects that might be of historical significance or might be clues to the location of the treasure. Finally, we found a clue that established beyond a shadow of a doubt that this was Queho's cave. A 12-gauge shotgun shell found right near the stone barricade in the front entrance of the cave. Buddy, working back farther into the depths of the cave, also came across a very interesting find. Pieces of black cloth that were from Queho's coat. We established this fact later on by going back to the barn and checking the mummy, and these matched the pieces of clothing found on the mummy itself.
Did you find any other artifacts there, Miles?
Yes, the pieces of cloth that Buddy sees here from his clothing, as we already told you about, a piece of his belt, and most interesting of all to me was the pieces of scripture from the Bible that were found scattered throughout the cave floor. Now, Queho had an elementary school education. Maybe this was his Bible. More likely it's from one of the 23 men that died under his gun. Also, far back into the cave, near the base of the floor, we found these 2 silver dollars dating back into the 1800s, the late 1800s, and this brings the total amount of money found in his cave to $4.66. Not exactly a treasure, but at least historically significant.
And so you believe in the El Dorado Mountains that Queho has a hidden gold mine?
Well, after we explored the cave and looked out over the area, we were sure that there was definite proof that Queho had gold in this area. And someday I certainly hope to return, and the rest of the party feels the same way, because somewhere in those rugged El Dorado Mountains, there's definitely the treasure of the mummy's gold.